Shenna Bellows, thanks for joining us. You've been Maine Secretary of State since 2021, the first woman elected to that position. Before that, you were the ACLU of Maine for 8 years, and you are also in the Maine State Senate. And then also you ran for the U.S. Senate in 2014, challenging Republican Senator Susan Collins. Talk about how well, you have a lot of experience in politics and as an advocate. How has that informed your candidacy for governor?
So it's so important in this moment that we have leaders who will stand up for people's constitutional rights and for democracy itself. As executive director of the ACLU of Maine and as an organizer prior to that, working on reproductive freedom, marriage equality, privacy, immigrants' rights, that prepared me well to challenge the Trump administration as Secretary of State. So when the Trump's DOJ came after your voter data and that of every American, I was one of the first secretaries to stand up and say, no, go jump in the Gulf of Maine. So I think that trajectory really strengthened my position and leadership nationally in protecting elections and fighting for people.
How would it inform the policies you would pursue? I mean, obviously you're the chief elections official in the state right now, and as you mentioned, this battle with the Trump administration over Mainers' voter data has been something your campaign is focused on quite a bit. But what about when you become governor? The things you need to do are a lot different. And how does that past experience inform the policies you may pursue?
So before I was ever executive director of the ACLU, I was a kid growing up in Hancock County and a graduate of Ellsworth High School, a Peace Corps volunteer and AmeriCorps volunteer. And one interesting thing about that Maine Senate race is I won a district that voted for me and voted for Donald Trump in 2016. Now, I'd been head of the ACLU, I'd been a leader on marriage equality, I'd co-chaired the same-day voter registration campaign. I didn't hide who I was, but I was very focused on economic issues because those really bring everybody together. Small business development, property taxes, trying to get those to be lower, investing in our schools and our kids. And I got reelected in that district twice, even though the 11 towns that I represented in central Maine, bridging CD2 and CD1, just like our state, voted for Donald Trump in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, talk about that a little bit because, just a couple of years ago, you made that move to remove the president, well, he wasn't the president at the time, remove Donald Trump from the ballot because of his conduct during the leading up to the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. How do you talk to those same Trump voters who may be still angry with you for trying to do that?
The same way I did when I made my decision. So for years, I've been going on conservative talk radio or truly any media outlet to talk about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. I'm really passionate about that. And of course, Republicans in the State House were pretty angry about the Trump decision. However, it was just a couple months later on presidential primary day. I was touring the polls. I was in Bucksport. And this Trump voter comes barreling up to me and says, are you Shenna Bellows? And of course, my name is Shenna, but I didn't correct him. I was like, yeah. And he said, I hear you on the radio all the time. And I was like, yeah. And he said, and I kid you not, you and Donald Trump are my favorite politicians.
What? Really?
He did.
Okay.
And I said, oh. And he said, I don't always agree with you, but you always say what you mean. And that's what I found when I represented a Trump district. It's what I experienced growing up. Half my family doesn't care about politics. Of the half that do, half voted for Trump, half voted for Harris. It really is about authenticity and connecting with people around shared values. Currently, I'm chairing the America 250 efforts for the state, the Maine Semi-Quincentennial Commission. And the folks that show up to that meeting, they're from all walks of life, and there are these common values. And I think the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is foundational to that we all share. So there were Trump Bellows voters in 2016, and I think there'll be Trump Bellows voters in 2026 as well.
Talk a little bit about your time at the ACLU of Maine. That organization has, I'm just kind of wondering about if your views with that align with that organization now, maybe for example, in the realm of criminal justice reform. How do you view those? What would your policy agenda look like in that arena?
So the ACLU has done some phenomenal work building bipartisan coalitions to really move a variety of issues forward. I remember when I first ran for office, I was the first federal candidate in the country to support legalization of marijuana. And that at the time was shocking. It was prior to legalization in this state. It was viewed as very cutting edge. Just in the same way that when I started leading on marriage equality, that was years before it was legal because we were moving that forward. And so similarly, with the ACLU's work in criminal justice, on privacy, on immigrants' rights, they have really been at the forefront and continue to lead to do work that is more thoughtful about how we support everyone in our communities. And I think those partnerships are important. And I think as governor, really thinking about why are we doing this the way we do it? And does it make sense for our communities? Does it keep us safer? And what's the best path moving forward? And I think we had a saying, no permanent enemies, no permanent friends, just permanent principles. So we would work with anyone to move forward defense of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And I think as governor, I'll work with anyone to move Maine forward.
As governor, what would be, I guess, what are your priorities? Like, what are the things that you really, really care about? What do you want to pursue? Like, what's LD1 if you're elected? I know you don't propose the bill, or you could, but like, what would you want to see in the legislature? What is the one priority you want to start with?
I have three.
Okay.
An economic new deal for Maine. We have to make Maine the most affordable state in the nation. Two, we need to invest in education because Maine is in the bottom quartile, and that's a problem. We really need to invest in our kids and our teachers. And three is healthcare, because we're seeing the crumbling of healthcare infrastructure, the closing of birthing centers and hospitals. We need to make sure that we're shoring that up to invest in Maine's future. So those are my top three priorities. That's what I'm hearing as I travel across the state, from York to Presque Isle. People are deeply concerned about those issues.
On the education front, the current governor, Governor Mills, has put a lot of more money into local education funding, meeting that 55% threshold that prior governors had not been able to meet. Is that a priority? Is the solution to education problems, is it more money, or is there something else that needs to happen there on for reforms?
So I've been a big proponent of that 55%, but I think we need to do more. And one of my proposals on the economic front is calling for a statewide moratorium on increases in property taxes, because the way we fund education is different from many other states, and it's very regressive. And people are really struggling with the double-digit property tax increases across the state. And I would pay for it by dramatically increasing property taxes for out-of-staters, because 1 in 6 Maine homes is a vacation home, and that's contributing to the housing crisis, but it's also revenue from folks who can afford a second or third home, whose residency is out of state, can afford to pay a little bit more. So we need to do more than the 55%. I think we need to dramatically increase teacher pay. We also need to increase teacher training. So I've called for a stipend for experienced teachers to bring student teachers into the classroom of $10,000 per teacher per year, paid for by the state. I think we need some accountability. We need to really invest in how are we making sure that every child can read? How are we investing in math? So that I think is really important. And then school infrastructure. I think we need a bond to fix our crumbling schools, because a lot of kids are going to school in substandard conditions, and that's not healthy or safe for their learning.
I'm glad you brought up the property taxes, because I know that that's top of mind for a lot of communities. And you mentioned the regressivity of those taxes too, which I think is really important. But again, this particular, the Democratic-controlled legislature and this Democratic governor have tried to send money back to those communities to help with that, but it doesn't seem to be working. What else can we do? And you mentioned this other idea of trying to tax people with second homes here, but is there anything else to help with the property tax burden?
So I actually think this is a big idea, because if you think about the revenues that would come in if 1 in 6 of those out-of-staters were paying a larger amount, that could be very significant. And calling for a statewide moratorium with a blue ribbon commission to look at how we're funding schools, counties, and municipalities. because I really think that our system is out of whack. We're seeing layoffs in schools that can't afford to lose teachers. We're seeing school budgets be rejected by property taxpayers who are concerned about losing their homes, and folks on fixed incomes or working families like mine was. And I think that's a lens that I bring that is unique in this race. I grew up very poor, and my father was a carpenter. My mom worked first in a light bulb filament factory in Sullivan and then in a greenhouse. We couldn't afford electricity or indoor plumbing until the 5th grade. That was a great year. But having those experiences, struggling, working hard, I know what it would mean for a family like mine was to have a double-digit increase in your property tax, and it's not acceptable. So revenue sharing has been a big piece of the legislature's agenda. When I was in my first term, I brought a bill to increase revenue sharing. In my second term, I was successful in that bipartisan coalition to send more money back to the towns. But I think we have to go bigger, and that's where my proposal comes from.
Let's talk about the healthcare piece a little bit too. You mentioned that. What does that look like? I mean, there's a big push, I think, from the federal candidates to do Medicare for all or something like that, but at the state level, what can the state do? Are we talking about sort of a revamped Derigo Health, which is something that was done a couple of years ago and rolled back, and I think in the Republican wave election of 2010, what can the state do on that front to help?
In times of chaos, there are often moments of opportunity. And the baseline for me is that no one should be sick because they are poor or poor because they are sick. We need universal single-payer health care for all, or Medicare for all. And I've talked to a lot of folks across the state. I've talked to retired hospital executives, current hospital executives. I've talked to doctors, nurse practitioners, folks on the ground. My mom, at age 49, went back to school through the University of Maine at Augusta system and University of Maine at Orono, became an RN. I was a home healthcare nurse during the pandemic. My sister worked in healthcare here in Maine. And so what I've heard as I've traveled the state is that the system is crumbling before our eyes. The payer mix isn't working. Hospitals in particular are losing huge amounts of money. We're seeing these closures. And so I think the state needs to rethink how we fund healthcare. My budget, my very first budget on day one, will include direct operating support for the infrastructure that is critical to our communities. And that means hospitals, community health centers, and birthing centers. And I also think we need to really invest in the school-based health centers. This is something that I was really proud of in my first term. I really advocated for school-based health centers. I think we need to go big and have a school-based health center in every district in the state. We need to have a mental health counselor in every school in the state. So in terms of that universal single-payer health care, we just did a healthcare forum with Maine All Care. We're doing one with Maine All Care. We did one with Maine Primary Care Association as well. And those organizations have done some deep thinking about how we get from where we are to where we need to be, which is universal healthcare for all.
So affordability is a huge issue for voters. I think all the candidates in both parties are talking about it, but they're talking about it in different ways, or the solutions in different ways. What's your solution to some of these things?
So having lived experience in the state Senate, and as head of the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, I see affordability through two lenses. Investment in the things that matter: healthcare, education, housing, infrastructure, and government efficiency. I think the state can save money in a variety of ways. I've done that at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, modernizing the BMV, modernizing elections, bringing online voter registration, automatic voter registration to the state. And so when I look at state government, for example, I've proposed a one-stop shop for businesses to streamline those processes. Similarly, a one-stop shop for services for people who are accessing food supports or Medicaid. And so I think we can do both. We can make critical investments, but also find savings in our government.
Last question. I know that as the Secretary of State, you're the chief elections official. There may be some folks who say that there's an inherent conflict of interest when you're running at the same time as being the chief elections official. I know that you're not the first person that this question has been posed to. But what do you say to those people who think that there's an inherent conflict?
Well, thank you for recognizing I'm not the first Secretary of State to run for office. Ken Curtis was the last Secretary of State to become governor in Maine when he was both Secretary of State and running on the ballot. I'm proud of being Maine's first female Secretary of State. We did our research, and not in Maine and not anywhere in the country has a Secretary of State ever stepped down, because there are checks and balances in the system. And I'm very proud we have the nation's longest serving elections director, Deputy Secretary Julie Flynn. She's running the day-to-day operations of the elections. And there are safeguards to ensure that those conflicts of interest don't arise. And I'm certainly proud of the history I've made, and not going to make history by stepping down. I'll continue in my role.
Shenna Bellows, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.